Okay, this video is for yoga students, and really it's for anyone who's interested in religion, spirituality, language, understanding a different culture, understanding maybe where some of our English terminology came from and some of our English ideas in the English language. We're going to go over today 18 key terms that we find in the Bhagavad Gita and some of these earlier texts from the Hindu yoga tradition. All right, so this will be in alphabetical order, and if I'm able to, I'm going to put the terms. I'm going to write each term so you can see it as well on this video. I don't know if I'm going to be able to do that, but we'll see. It'll be a little bit of a test for me. I've been just doing these videos where I'm just talking, but I'd like to get more into videos where I do some other things with the videos and make it a little bit more, for those who are not only auditory learners, but maybe visual learners. So anyway, the first term is Atman, right? So Atman is generally translated as soul, but it's also translated as self. And you could say it's also spirit. Atman is like the individual soul. Like we all have a soul, right? That idea that we know already, right? And sometimes we talk about a person as a soul, like that poor soul or that, poor person or individual, right? So the Atman is like individual soul. And this is in the yoga tradition, the idea is that the individual soul thinks that it's separate from the whole, but it's really not. And when it realizes that it's not separate from everything, this is called self-realization. And the word self is often used as a translation of Atman, and it could be used as a small s or big S, but the big S is generally the term for the oversoul, which is also Brahman or Brahman. And that's where we get the idea of yoga as the union of the small self or the individual soul or self with the whole, with the entirety of everything. And that would be yoga, or the union. And it's really more of like, it's not like uniting the two. It's more of the realization that the small self or the individual self is already the whole. It just forgot, right? It just temporarily forgot that it was. It's like the drop in the ocean. Well, the drop is the ocean. Drop is part and parcel of the ocean. It doesn't need to find that, it does not need to attain anything. It just needs to remember, right? And that would be the idea of self-realization, okay? So next term, avatar. Now this avatar is like a descent of the divine into human form. And we know this in the West, because Jesus, in a sense, was like an avatar. He was for some, he was God in human form. The God that took form as a human, and we get that from the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And God came down to earth in form, in a body. That would be avatar. And that in the Hindu tradition, in the yoga tradition, one of the most famous avatars is Krishna, who is an avatar of Vishnu. Vishnu is like, Yahweh or Jehovah or the big guy in the sky, so to speak. And Krishna is the Son, right? The Son of God. Just like Jesus is called the Son of God. Or you could say that Krishna is the divine in human form and has the power of God. In the Hindu tradition, you have this idea of the Trimurti, which is this trinity of deities that begins with Brahma, who is the creator, Vishnu, who is the preserver, and Shiva is called the destroyer. Or you can say God. G is generator, that would be Brahma. O is organizer, that would be Vishnu. And D is destroyer or dissolver, and that would be Shiva. The difference between Hinduism and Christianity is that in Hinduism, there is an idea that there can be more than one avatar, right? And there's been many avatars. Whereas in Christianity, there's the idea that Jesus was the sole Son of God. He was the way, the truth, and the life, and no one can come to God except through him. Whereas in Hinduism, you have the idea that there's many names and forms, and the avatar can take different, identities, and you can get to God through any of those identities. Ultimately, they're all one, like Krishna and Rama, for example. They're both separate identities, individuals. They're both avatars, but they're both perfect, as far as I'm aware. There's different distinctions between avatars. That's a whole nother thing. But in theory, at least, whether you devote yourself to Rama or Krishna or some other avatar, it doesn't matter. You can still get to God, right? But let's leave that. Obviously, in the Sanskrit word is really avatara, right? Avatar is more the Hindi. You chop off the A at the end, so it becomes shorter, avatar. But it's really avatara. Next term, bhakti. Bhakti is devotion, worship. Bhakti is also the path of devotion, the path to God through loving dedication, devotion, worship. And the bhakta, or the person who is a worshiper or devotee, they devote themselves to God in some form or another, and they get to God through that worship. And they worship through, it's usually the path of the heart. So sometimes it takes the form of like just some kind of ritual, but also it can take the form of music, dance, something like that. Something that, where you pour your heart out, you give your heart and soul to God. That would be bhakti yoga, the path of bhakti. Krishna says in the Gita that whatever form of God a sincere devotee worships, Krishna will receive their devotion, which is a very important idea. But Krishna also says, I urge you to worship me as the supreme. That's a whole nother issue. We won't go into that right now. But Brahman, we already talked about Brahman or Brahman. Brahman, this is the term for God used in the absolute sense, the ground of being. Like the only reality, the ultimate reality. I like the ultimate reality, or the ground of being. Brahman is ultimately nameless and formless, beyond what's called nama rupa, beyond name and form and attribute, beyond any concept, beyond any name. The term also nirguna Brahman is used as the attributeless Brahman, or God without any attribution. You can't even attribute to God anything. Transcendent. God is transcendent. And there is also a form of Brahman, Saguna Brahman, which is more immanent, where God is more understandable. But ultimately, the nirguna is the transcendent, is the ultimate reality. These all, we're just scratching the surface here. Buddhi. Buddhi is used a lot in the Bhagavad Gita. Buddhi means intelligence. It translates as intelligence. It translates as discrimination. It translates as knowledge. Buddhi yoga is is what is usually referred to as jnana yoga, the path of knowledge, the path of discriminating between what is real and what is not real. And that is the higher mind. That is when you tap into the higher mind that can discriminate between what is real and what is not real, between what is true and what is not true, true and what is false. And you can remove, or you can clear away the false identifications, the false identities, and you can make way for the truth to shine through. And that would be Buddhi Yoga. Buddhi is also where we get the term Buddha, which means an awakened being. So this is also, Buddhi in a sense is what leads to awakening or enlightenment. Dharma has many translations. It can mean law, it can mean morality, it can mean righteousness, it can mean religion, it can mean obligation, it can mean duty, it can mean caste duty, it can mean cosmic order, way. Sanatana Dharma is the term for Hinduism, the original term for Hinduism. Sanatana means eternal. Dharma is often, not often, but sometimes translated as way. So the eternal way, Sanatana Dharma, or the eternal religion. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna encourages Arjuna to do his dharma, his duty, his obligation. He's a kshatriya, he is of the warrior caste, which means that it is his duty to fight in battles to uphold dharma on earth. And if he doesn't do that, he's not fulfilling his duty, and he is somehow going against the cosmic order of things. And so Krishna says, well, that's one reason why you should fight in this battle, even though you don't want to, but really it's your duty to do that. Dhyana is usually translated as meditation. Krishna gives Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita some directions, some instructions on how to meditate. The path of dhyana, the path of meditation, is sometimes called Raja Yoga, the royal path or the royal way. And Raja Yoga is sometimes referred to as one of the four paths that is presented in the Bhagavad Gita. But in reality, dhyana or Raja Yoga isn't talked about that much in the Gita. It's not talked as much about as much as karma is, and bhakti is, and Buddhi Yoga is. But meditation is really not different than any of the other paths either. They're all interconnected, even though different names are given, but they're really kind of getting at the same thing ultimately. The gunas are attributes of prakriti, which is nature, material nature, and material nature, according to this system, which is called Sankhya, the philosophical system upon which yoga is based, which Krishna refers to in the Gita. Sankhya talks about the gunas, and that there are three gunas. There's sattva, rajas, and tamas. Sattva is the quality of goodness or purity. Rajas is the purity of activity or stimulation or passion. And tamas is darkness or ignorance or sloth. And ultimately, the idea is that you want to go from tamas to rajas to sattva. You want to live more and more a sattvic life, and then ultimately you want to transcend the gunas completely, and you want to realize the self. You want to realize your true eternal nature, and you have to go beyond prakriti. You have to go beyond the physical, the material nature in order to do that. Jnana and vijnana. Jnana is one of the most often used words in the Gita, like Buddhi is. Jnana is like spiritual knowledge, direct spiritual experience, experiential knowledge, which really is wisdom. The path of Jnana Yoga or Buddhi Yoga is discernment, discriminating between what is real and what is not real, or what is true and what is false, like I said before. Sometimes it's called the philosophical path or the thinking path. The word in Greek is gnosis, and the word in English is know, and they're all connected. Jnana, gnosis, and know are all related, because they're all part of the Indo-European language family. Jnana is the oldest term. Jnana means to know, like direct experiential knowledge. Know with a capital K. Gnosis in Greek is the same basically, and know in English also is essentially the same. Karma means action. Karma yoga is the path of selfless action, meaning you're trying to act without expectation for what you're going to get out of it. You're not acting selfishly. In other words, you're acting selflessly, and that would be when you do that, when you do that practice, ultimately you free yourself from action, because you ultimately realize there's nothing to do, and that you are not the doer. But to get there, you might need to practice. You might need to observe your motivations for acting, and why you're acting. Why you're choosing to act one way versus another way, and you might want to start acting more and more from a place of selflessness, and maybe you could say love versus fear. That's karma yoga. Maya is the veil of illusion. No one knows reality as it really is because of Maya. There's this veil of ignorance, veil of illusion, and we're all caught in the illusion until we freely choose to extricate ourselves from the illusion, pierce the veil of illusion, and know reality as it truly is. That's a big one. We won't go into that really right now. Moksha, when you do that, then you attain moksha, which is freedom or liberation. You liberate yourself, or you can also say that's self-realization, where the small self realizes the big self, and realizes that the two are really one. You've transcended duality. In other words, you've transcended the pairs of opposites, and you've gone back to the oneness. And that is also yoga. Yoga means union, or you could also say oneness. Prakriti, Purusha. Prakriti is material nature. I've already said that. Purusha would be the spirit that is our true self, which is like pure awareness, or the witness, or the observer, which is really not ultimately part of Prakriti. Prakriti is illusory, is part of this Maya, right? But we don't see that from where we are. We identify with Prakriti, we identify with the gunas which make up Prakriti, and so we do not understand our true reality. We don't understand that we are Purusha, not Prakriti. Purusha meaning spirit, but also it can be translated. Purusha can be translated as person, and that's where we get the word person in English, is from Purusha. And that's why this is a little confusing, because whether you translate it as person or spirit can make a big difference in how you understand this. Samadhi is the 8th step in both Buddhism and in Hinduism. In Patanjali's Ashtanga Yoga, the 8 limbs of Patanjali, Samadhi is the highest limb. Samadhi is where you attain this cosmic consciousness, or you go beyond subject and object. You go beyond duality, and you realize the oneness of everything. You attain yoga, union. You realize that what you thought was your individual self is really part of the whole, and is intrinsically part of the whole. Samatvam, in chapter 2 of the Gita, Krishna tells Arjuna that yoga is samatvam. Samatvam meaning even-mindedness in all situations, or equanimity, meaning that your mind does not get agitated. You are established in the state of buddhi or jnana, where you are constantly in meditation on the self, and you realize, and you cannot be phased. Your mind cannot be agitated, because you're You're always in that place, right? That's samatvam. So when you're in that place of samatvam, then you're in yoga. Yoga is samatvam, Krishna says. Samsara, when you're not in that place, you're in samsara. Samsara is the cycle the cycle of suffering, where you are experiencing pain and suffering on whatever level you experience it, because you feel yourself to be separate, right? If you don't feel yourself to be separate anymore, if you feel yourself completely whole and unified, then you wouldn't suffer and you wouldn't be experiencing samsara. But as long as you do, then you're experiencing samsara. Yeah, bud. All right, bud, we're gonna go. I just got a couple more here, bud, and then I'm ready. Okay, I'll be right there. I already talked about Sankhya. Sankhya is the philosophy that is earlier than yoga that Krishna mentions, and we'll talk more about Sankhya, but it's a whole philosophical system in and of itself, which talks about the gunas and prakriti, etc., and purusha. Sannyasa means renunciation. Krishna keeps telling Arjuna that you have to renounce. You have to renounce selfless action, basically. You have to renounce the fruits of action. You have to act without expecting result or reward. And that's true karma yoga. Sukha dukkha. Sukha is happiness. Dukkha is suffering. We're either in happiness or we're in suffering. Most of the time we're going back and forth between the two. But true happiness, true sukha, is where you transcend suffering completely. Pain and suffering are a thing of the past. You have established yourself in the truth, and there's no going back. And that would be the state of yoga, and that's the last term, is yoga. And yoga here means discipline, yoking, doing some kind of practice, some kind of discipline to get to yoga with a capital Y, which means union, where you do the practice, you do yoga to get to yoga. It's sometimes referred to as a unitive discipline, meaning you do the discipline to get to the union. Okay, so that's it for this, and thank you for listening, and we'll do more soon. It's just some key concepts for basic yoga literacy, and Om Namaste. Hari Om Tat Sat.